And good morning, everyone. This is Andrew Vermes. I work for Kepner-Tregoe, and this is Proactive Problem Management. I'll just increase the size of the screen here so you find it a bit easier to see, I hope. And welcome. Welcome to this rather cloudy Friday in the UK. Wherever you are, I hope it's a little bit better. So let's just get right on to the issue of the day. Now, this is my favorite cartoon for this purpose. Every day, many of us have these Homer Simpson moments, as I sometimes refer to them as, because these are the moments where you know something was going to go wrong and you, for whatever reason, didn't find any chance to do anything about it. Do please mute yourself if you're doing some stuff in the background. It's perfectly all right to do that, but I may not have got round to muting you yet. So. And do please unmute yourself at any moment when you feel like throwing in a question. So what we want to avoid with potential problem analysis is the Homer Simpson moment. Now, this was just such a Homer Simpson moment that I thought was entertaining and interesting at the beginning of the week. Now, this may have been a slightly apocryphal story, but it appeared in a great many national and international newspapers. So I'll just leave you to read this for a moment. I think that's kind of an amazing story, but actually I was at DevOps Days, maybe some of you were too this week in London, and there are a bunch of other horror stories of people doing things that were irreversibly tragic that could really have been avoided as things to do. So I think PPA is really a technique for trying to make sure we don't run into any more trouble than we absolutely have to. And that leads me to a question that I'd like to ask you to respond to in the chat box with a number, a percentage, if you wouldn't mind, please. So the chat box you can open by going to the top of the page and finding the chat icon and then sending a message to everyone. And here's me asking you, what's your guess? What's your guess about the proportion of issues or problems or negative events that you could have seen coming and prevented if there had been a moment to think about it? And I appreciate they're all hugely busy. Oh, yeah. So Judy Tolson says 25%. Okay. Oh, 80% from another participant. 60%. 90%. 30%? Okay, so there's quite a range. But whatever it is for your organization and the complexity of your process or IT infrastructure, you know, there is a large-ish percentage of problems that we could predict and prevent. So that's the intention of PPA. And we'll get into some tips for doing that in just a moment. One thing to say about information technology and incidents, but this also applies to production issues, is that incidents and problems are somewhat like ticks. A lot of the action is under the skin, and the effects may go beyond the obvious. You may not know you've had a tick bite until, unfortunately, you are 2 or 3 years into the situation, the dreadful situation where, like a very good, and in fact my oldest friend, suffers from Lyme's disease. And so we have to be prepared for effects that go well beyond the obvious and start to notice those small little pinpricks of issues, small little events that happen to disturb the way in which things are working that we really ought to take notice of, because they're the forewarning of a much bigger problem. Now, I find it absolutely fascinating when you look at the information technology world particularly, but this is true of other kinds of enterprise too, that when you look at the cost of incidents and you add up the various categories of losses for the organization, they're absolutely staggering. Why do people take risks? I have absolutely no clue. Now, many organizations do measure pretty well incident handling costs. It's quite hard to measure the actual cost of your reputation risk when you have had a piece of downtime. Maybe some of your services have been unavailable to your users and customers. How many of them actually walk? You may not be able to get that information directly. Net promoter scores and such things do give you some idea, but they're not complete ways of estimating reputation losses. Lost work cost, notoriously hard to estimate, but still there's some time lost in switching to other tasks, assuming you can switch to another task, or if you've got a complete loss of working time, then of course the loss of productivity is the cost of that individual. But it's big, whatever it is. And at the same time, the reasons not to be proactive and preventive, it seems to me, are quite weak. So it's an interesting thing. So far, this has really been a call to arms to use a little more potential problem analysis. You've probably all seen the whale story. You may well have seen it on your KT class. I see Graham Curran's on the call, and he's certainly used this as a video during classes that he's run. But if you haven't seen it, please look up the story of the whale in Oregon and the dreadful situation where people faced with a large whale on the beach decided that it was too hard to cut it up and decided to blow it up instead, sending huge lumps of blubber into the air and destroying a few cars that were parked nearby, as well as risking life and limb. And it's interesting that people think things are a good idea without necessarily going through the detail of what they are planning, and therefore run into some trouble. So what KT is about, obviously, and you've seen this diagram, many of you, before, is consistency about everything we do to get more value added work. Now, in order to get there, what we're trying to do is be consistent about the way we manage risks, and potential problem analysis is a tool for that. It's not the only tool. Those of you who are wedded to FMEA as a method, then that's completely fine, although it takes somewhat longer to do well than PPA. So a quick reminder about what the methods are, particularly for the benefit of those that have come along to this session not previously exposed to KT methods. And here we have potential problem analysis, which is the subject under discussion for today, which is about making sure we anticipate the risks and ensure that any potential problems are well managed. But we have some other techniques also, which may be more appropriate. And the purpose of showing you this slide right now is just to get you to think, well, do I want to do a risk assessment right now? Or actually, do I need to go back a step and review the decision that we've made using decision analysis and think, well, actually, have I taken the right path in the first place? Or maybe you need to go back 2 steps and say, well, it's premature to be taking action or making decisions because we haven't found the cause of whatever the issue was, and maybe we need to be using problem analysis to solve the actual problem rather than doing an attempt of potential problem analysis around the implementation of a workaround. So it's just worth reviewing those things and thinking to yourself, well, do you really need to use PPA right now? But assuming that you do, here are some thoughts about that. So a reminder of the full technique for those of you who have been on the class a long while ago. It's a 4-step technique like everything in KT, pretty much. What could go wrong? Why might that happen? Do something to stop it if you can. And if you, for any reason, can't stop it, or maybe your preventive action fails, then you have a contingent or backup ready to work. But it's also making sure that you have future-proofed your preventive and contingent actions. No point having a great failover system if it doesn't cut in promptly when your IT assets go down. And if you are planning lots of changes, of course, potential problem analysis or risk management is mandatory. But regrettably, a lot of the time when you see risk logs written by a change management team, they seem a little bit samey. They say, well, you know, what could go wrong? Well, the upgrade might fail. And what are we going to do about it if that happens? Well, we'll back it out. But regrettably, it's not always as simple as that, and you may need to do more thinking, as in this example. So here's a nice example of not just saying the upgrade might not work, but getting a bit more detail about the granularity of those potential problems. There's not enough time to complete the upgrade in 12 hours. Why might that happen? Well, root file systems are too small, or you can't back out the patches, or there's some latent corruption. And one way to prevent that is practice the upgrade in advance. Contingent action obviously is abandon the upgrade and reload the original OS. But in some environments, abandoning upgrades and reloading the original OS is not so simple. So you will need to practice and be ready to do that contingent action with some detailed checklists. So detail is the key to success if you're going to do good quality potential problem analysis. Now, here's another example where I decided to repaint my windows some while ago, and rather than being satisfied with simply saying, okay, I'm going to repaint the windows at the weekend, let's have a look at what's the detail of repainting a window. So these are old-fashioned Crittall steel windows inside a wooden frame. And when I open up that idea and start to strip that back and look at the detail of what's going on, well, I've got a bunch of things to do. I need to remove the metal window from the wooden pane. Then remove the glass from the metal window, strip back to bare metal, weld a new section in as needed, prime that, replace the glass undercoat, gloss coat, put the metal window in the wooden frame, having meantime stripped the wooden frame back and repainted that, and then seal the whole thing together. And one of the things that's important if you're taking windows out and you've got an operation that's going to take 2 or 3 days to get the whole job done, then you have to secure the thing. So I thought I'd put a wooden board into the window hole, but then I started to ask PPA questions. Well, what if the board gets broken? Okay, so I need to worry about burglars, and I then need to think about making sure that that replacement board in the window hole is actually quite well secured, so in fact I can't compromise my home security. And then I can have some more thoughts about glass panes being broken as I remove the glass from the metal windows, but also as I replace them later on, having done the painting. So I need to be ready for those things. And doing some detail about the task really helps me to identify a richer set of potential problems, which I probably wouldn't have done if I'd simply said to my wife, okay, I'm going to repaint the window at the weekend. Now, for those of you who are into technology, this is the location of potential problem analysis in the ITIL, the IT Infrastructure Library framework. We normally would expect potential problem analysis to be used before you implement any potential fix or workaround in a live system. But that's also true of manufacturing situations and other enterprises. Before you take a significant action that's likely to change the nature of your process, whether it's intended to make it better or not, we should normally be using a little bit of potential problem analysis and logging those risks, and then afterwards we can learn whether we have indeed captured all the risks that we should have captured and increase the richness of our PPA for the future. Now, this is the starting point for proactivity. When you start thinking about any complex system, there are almost always wiggles. There are small disturbances. There are small things happening. Almost every day you see some little slowness on your computer. Almost every day you might see or hear some kind of cough from your car. All these things are around us the whole time, and some of those small disturbances may precede major incidents. But often, by the time we've noticed that there is something unusual going on, the situation has blown apart. And we actually have lots of things going on, lots of incidents to solve, and it starts to become really, really difficult. Now, those people that have well-oiled event management systems will often be monitoring all of these things. But even then, you have to have a great deal of care in deciding which things are worth monitoring, and then building monitoring into your software and your systems up front so you're able to detect these small variabilities. But also it may be a question of educating your user community so that they start reporting more carefully things they see which are odd or unusual or really shouldn't be happening. They're right now not disturbing their work, but you may be wanting to do something about that. So some time ago, I started noticing that my computer was going into an automated restart, and I ignored it for a while. And of course, the consequences were pretty much inevitable. We got the blue screen of death. We actually had a small virus attack that took luckily only my laptop out, not anybody else's, because it was that kind of virus. But if I'd noticed earlier, then I could have gone into safe mode, I could have got to the support desk and got the thing cleaned up before it caused me some distress. So noticing small disturbances is an important thing. Now, how do you get set up to make this a daily habit? So those of you in an IT environment working with support people who are regularly processing all kinds of incidents and problems, one of the things that is starting to become more prevalent and certainly works enormously well is goal people for proactive tickets. Now, what's a proactive ticket or case? It's one where there is no problem reported by any user or colleague so far, but we as the IT department start noticing some unusual behavior in the system, even unusual behavior that's not currently being event monitored. Put that in there, log it. If it looks like you have time to do something about doing a PPA on it, do that. And then make that a daily habit and goal. And I've seen that people who get 5% of these proactive tickets in have a huge effect on their uptime and availability. Second thing, obviously recognize regular contributors. And also, there's a mantra that's worth thinking about. Lots of people have insurance. And why do we have insurance? Because we don't want to be impacted by bad events. It's never wasted. It's much better to save it, to have it, rather than to cope without it. So if you want to measure the proactive work, one thing you can do is to create a ticket category for proactive cases. In other words, where no business process or user or customers so far noticed an issue. So often you will find in your incident categorization, there will be an unused category that you can camp on and use for this purpose. Encourage everybody, including managers, to include unusual system behavior. And if it's not really a thing, then just close the case. You've learned something from it. And at least there's an audit trail of you've noticed things which you can turn to later if indeed there is an incident. And then one thing that's important, if you're going to be proactive, you will notice an initial increase in cases, because if people are logging proactive cases saying, look, this looks a bit odd and maybe we should investigate if we have time, then you'll get an increase in incidents to start with, and you'll need to be able to explain to managers that the KPIs are going to go in the wrong direction for a short time until we get onto the top of this proactivity issue.